On a record. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Recording, everyone. This is about system thinking, system modeling, and I'm sharing so that it's in proper order and I can share my screen, right? And you should be able to see my screen coming up now. Yes, excellent. Okay, I will be repurposing some parts of my standard teaching, standard talks that I do. And I'm not going to try to anchor you or digress into a specific framework or ways of working. It's just because this mirror board gives me a great opportunity to zoom in on anything specific that comes to mind. I'm using it, right? It gives me like two-dimensional way to scroll up and down, left and right. So that's great. So what is system thinking and why is it important to me as the professional, as a coach, as a trainer, as a mentor to others? So system thinking allows me um, to, to think holistically, systemically, or ecosystemically. And by doing so, being able to see the whole, being able to see a complete picture. We oftentimes end up dealing with peripheral manifestations of something that has a much deeper root cause, and we don't really understand what's the root cause. We end up treating what we end up attending to superficial signals. Like for example, you have a rash on your hand and it's like redness, and you keep applying like a cream or like maybe a steroidal cream, it doesn't go away, and you wonder why. Well, maybe you should start eating oranges. Maybe you have a systemic issue with allergies that you need to address, and once you do that, uh, your your redness is going to go away, your rash is going to go away. So system thinking is the big part of my daily work, daily routine. I use it when I interact with my coachees, trainees, clients. Um, System thinking helps me with system modeling. And when I say system modeling, like I mentioned, I don't mean software design, software engineering, which is a huge part of, of agile ways of working. It's more about organizational design and system dynamics. And organizational design, by the way, is the first order factor that defines system dynamics. Everything else just follows. Culture, structure, norms, behaviors, mindset. Those are all great things, but by far the most important thing is organizational design. Now, just to help me graphically illustrate what I'm about to say, I'm going to show this picture, right? So here you see a sun. So the sun is shining and rain is coming down. Now, none of these two events have any direct impact on the New York City, New York Stock Exchange being open, right? These are two independent things, and they are just they correlate. They don't really cause one another. So you may have rain, and on Sunday your stock market, your floor exchange will be closed, and vice versa. You may have a sunny day, and it will be fully open. Now, when it comes to blossoming a flower here, sun shining and rain is coming down regularly. That's a causation. There's a cause and effect relationship. Now we can argue if it's direct or indirect. How sun rays, UV light translates into photosynthesis and makes the flower grow. What happens when water goes to soil? So, but it is relevant. One leads to another. Without sun, most likely the flower is not going to grow. Without water, most likely the flower is not going to grow. So when we model systems, when we look at organizations, we are almost not concerned with correlation as much, because those, if events take place independently and ad hoc without any relationship to one another, it's really hard to predict or control what's gonna happen in the system. However, we may need to scrutinize whether or not we're dealing with a correlation only or perhaps with causation. Now, here's an example of one of the powerful tools to expose the system, to see system dynamics, is called causal loop diagrams, or CLD in brief. Although I don't like acronyms, so it's a CLD, stands for causal loop diagram. Here's an example of one, which probably requires a little bit of deciphering. So let me try to explain what it means. This is probably the simplest example to look at. what happens if we have a system optimizing goal to increase feature velocity? And we are talking about a very tactical situation, very, what I call trench level, at the trenches with a team, a single team. Well, with the goal of increasing velocity, we may feel pressure that there will be, we'll try actions for high feature velocity. And what are those? And we know what those are, right? We're going to start inflating numbers. We're going to create artificial estimates that will be padded and beefed up. So that may lead to system gaming, right? If there is a reward associated with higher velocity, it will exacerbate the problem. It will lead to this additional pressure. Now, it will also lead to gaming numbers. Now, if we have low value of reward, the impact may not be as drastic. But the more monetary reward you're going to put on your numbers, the more dramatic will be the impact. So value of reward has a positive influence on these two variables. We call these system variables. So now, if you have pressure to game the numbers, right? Because if you're being monetized for it, right? If you're being priced for it, the degree of measurement dysfunction is going to grow. So you always want to look at any variable from a standpoint: is it a good thing or is it a bad thing? Do I want more of it or do I want less of it? And of course, if you have two variables that are interrelated, you want to see whether it's in the same direction or the opposite direction. If this goes up, does this one also go up or does it go down? Now, if you have a high degree of measurement dysfunction in the system, your ability to improve the system is going to go down. And to show the opposite effect, we usually put an O, which stands for an opposite, or a minus. Annotation is actually rather arbitrary. Lately I like pluses and minuses more so than O's, because people keep asking, what's an O? Minus is kind of more intuitive. Here's another example here for you. So if we have pressure to take actions for high velocity, we may end up with a feature velocity that is going up. And when it goes up, imagine you're on a bumpy road, right? The faster you drive, the faster you encounter those bumps. The number of bugs is going to grow. Now, the number of bugs goes up, it has an opposite effect on velocity, which is called a negative. It's a stabilizing systemic loop, right? It's a loop that stabilizes itself. Now, we have a question mark here, which means we're not sure yet what this impact might be. But what would happen if you add a certain number of developers? That could be a question, right? So this question could be answered in multiple ways. If you add a few very skilled people, you're not gonna, break Conway's law. Brooks' law, which means effectively if you put more people to the project that's already late, it's gonna come in later. You're gonna end up just a few skilled people, and by doing so, you may potentially increase velocity by doing what's called quick fix to the system. Very few hands, but very skilled people. Now, if you have unskilled developers, but in abundance, just because you put more people there, it doesn't mean your velocity is going to go up. Most likely going to introduce even more bugs. Sometimes we bring another variable, and it's called cash supply. Now, what's your budget? Now, if your budget is very tight and you're looking for for bottom dwellers, we'll call them, in any profession, they're bottom dwellers, people that are low quality people, right? Because they haven't excelled in their profession. That if you put a constraint on budget, on cash, then the number of developers you're going to get, if it's a high number, most likely it's going to be at low price, low quality, low bugs. So this is a system model that helps you identify some of the potential cause and effect relationships. Let me proceed a little further and show you, and this is just an example of a legend. And by the way, in one of the links that I pinged you folks, I will, I offer the link to my site after this is over. Hopefully the recording comes out okay. I'm going to upload it there with the images, so you're going to have them, okay? So don't worry, you can take screenshots if you would like, but you're going to have those. Now, here's another example of slightly different, well, actually, it's a relevant discussion here, relevant topic. When we have individual performance evaluation in place, and many organizations have it, I'm sure you've seen some, then this may lead to what, well, naturally leads to what's called existence of a year-end bonus, right? What its impact on the downstream variables? It will have an opposite and delayed, double pipe stands for delayed, effect on peer-to-peer support. And if you worked for similar organizations to mine, large investment banks, large consultancies, just many companies that put a lot of stress on individual performance and bonuses, oftentimes we see deterioration of peer-to-peer support because people are pretty selfish when it comes down to it, right? Everyone wants to get a piece of it. So you have this, collision, mine versus you, me versus you. Peer-to-peer support in general is a great thing to have. Would you not agree? Then if so, if we had a lot of it, intrinsic motivation and willingness to work together would go up. So we want that goodness in the system. Although if this is low, this is going to be low. It's going to have a negative opposite effect on internal competition and rivalry, which in itself a bad thing. This bad thing by itself has a dramatic, thickness usually stands for dramatic. Like if you were to draw it with on a whiteboard with a Sharpie, with a dry with a eraser, black marker, the dry eraser, you would put a very thick line. This has a negative effect on team synergy and stability. And you may actually trace it all the way down throughout the system and get to a point where you look at the ability to scale healthy Scrum or organizational agility and customer happiness overall. So a couple of things I'm going to say before I pause, take questions, and go to another example. These are just as good as individuals' ability and willingness to have a discussion. So these causal loop diagrams, these system models, are best to be developed by a handful of people that work together, have something in common, and being able and willing to have a discussion. So these are not best practices. These are not mandates. These diagrams are just very useful, very helpful to structure and have a conversation. Typically, we say it's a minimal necessary waste. Once you have a conversation, and this certainly helps you with it, you can throw it away as the unnecessary, no longer useful waste, as long as you understand what's happening in the system. These one-pagers or these canvases, in my experience at least, have served a huge purpose when working with coachees, with colleagues, coaches, with senior management, when you really needed to engage them in the conversation. The power of this is also once people see something, it is hard for them to unsee. So it's like it sometimes even becomes very frustrating because now you are dealing with you own this as opposed to you renting from someone else. You own this discovery on your own. So I'm happy to take maybe a question or two before I give you some additional flavors, because if for those people that haven't used these, haven't seen these, they may not immediately realize that with this you can build an entire ecosystem, organizational ecosystem that goes from from HR to software engineering, from location strategy to finance and budgeting. Pretty much you can map the entire organizational system together and see how these variables interact with one another during runtime. I'm happy to take a question too before I meanwhile shift to another example. It's best if you just raise a hand and ask, because if you ping in questions, would you rather me look at the chat? Okay, maybe there are no questions. So let me give another. Yeah,
we do have one that regarding the red text on the existence of the end of year bonus. Was there
color coding? Like this is another one. This is arbitrary and it's as per whoever creates it. So I like sometimes I signify the criticality, the importance of a variable by color coding a different, with a different color, just to gain attention. Sometimes you make it, bold. Existence of a year bonus, to me, it's a pretty um, important variable there. So that's why I color coded it. Here, in fact, there was also one variable that is circled in red. Um, and I'll explain why, but it's important. That's why I did it. And by the way, and this is not to, digress too much. Ideally, on a good day, right, whether it's structured training or just a conversation of a few colleagues, you don't want to obviously give a ready solution. I'm giving you some just because this is, we're having this recorded webinar. Typically, you want to design a system on its own. Even this exercise that I sometimes run in class would be anchoring people to my views, because even these variables could be biased, right? This is just for the sake of having an exercise. But you can, there are different ways you can start a conversation on and model the system. You can either do a brain dump of a few ideas on a canvas and see if you can turn them into variables and interconnect, or you can have like a structured conversation with a colleague. Well, we have this issue in the system. Let's start with one variable and build out and see what happens downstream, and how does this variable impact the rest of the system, or vice versa. How does this variable get impacted by other variables? So just to give you a disclaimer that these are not out of the box unpack and install things, right? But here's another example. I heard some of you folks said, I got certified in this, I got certified in that. Some Scrum Masters, some coaches, of course, great roles to be in. Here is in a system dynamic around the role of a Scrum Master. And by the way, notice this suggested solution title here, which means it's not a prescriptive, it's not the only way to solve it. In fact, any one of you may say, Gene, you know what? I disagree with the direction of the error, or I think this error is bidirectional. There was a stabilizing loop, or you're missing a variable, and I don't understand how you go from this to this. You need to add something in between to make this translation more clear, more more common sense. And that's a fair request. So here's an example. With the goal of creating organizational support for a Scrum Master role, in my experience, usually two things may happen. One thing is, it's like a knee-jerk reaction. Sometimes it's referred to as a quick fix. Maybe I should put a little acronym here. It's QF, quick fix. Why is it a quick fix? Because it's easy to do, and relatively cheap to do, right? So you sometimes see the creation of the ivory tower, or I call it the good old boys club of Agile best practices cookbooks. The community of it's like it's the organizational vertical almost. It's like a locally optimized internal structure that is optimized for their own existence, and with that come lots of wiki pages, lots of box notes, lots of PDF files, stuff that is considered to be so critical, so important for Agile transformations, for Agile adoptions. In all fairness, quite frankly, I usually say, if your font of your deck is less than 12 pixels, you might as well buy a book. You don't need to write these heavy documents. In fact, most of this information is commoditized and it's free in the industry, so you don't need to create thousands of those pages. But nevertheless, we see organizations that are doing this in volume, in abundance. And oftentimes it's explained by the fact that there are internal colleagues that are looking for things to do. And as much as we want to rely on internal intellects that are great and supportive of Agile improvements, adoptions, sometimes we see excess of this, and we have Lorman's laws of organizational behavior. I'm going to show them shortly. In fact, rule number 4 says, on Friday, I'm paraphrasing, on Friday, managers and analysts become coaches on Monday. And that's why I end up with these power towers. So this is not a good variable to have. Just this is a long way of saying. Because if we have it in the system and it's high, risks of having agile theater and broad and shallow adaptations where you change wide but very little, very superficially. So this is not a good thing, and it's going to increase another good thing, another not a good thing. So this is over time. It's a delayed effect. Double pipe sits for delay. It's going to have an opposite effect on chances of succeeding with real less adoption. And again, this is a less training from the less training slide. So ignore this. Just consider this some other goodness that you want to have with the theater and the masquerade. Sometimes we see associated with these ivory towers. You don't see as much of goodness in the system. Now, it also has an opposite effect on the likelihood that experienced and self-learning Scrum Masters will have freedom and safety. Why? Well, because if you have the tower, a prescriptive, organizational structure that prescribes what Agile should look like, what Scrum should look like, best practices are out there, maturity metrics and stuff that is very prescriptive, then it kind of de-incentivizes individuals that are otherwise genuinely want to learn. So you're kind of killing the ambition, you're killing the desire. Now, I circled the Scrum Master community in red, and let me explain first of all why, and just let me talk through it for a second. So with this organizational support for the Scrum Master role, there is another natural outcome that I've often seen. It's the creation of the Scrum Master community, which is in itself is a great thing. In fact, I am a strong supporter of having communities, and a community has a very specific meaning, right? It's flat. It doesn't have a pecking order. Typical organizational design elements that are present in the vertical structure do not exist in a horizontal structure. So if one of the litmus tests, by the way, if you see whatever you used to see here, now you see here, something has gone wrong. I oftentimes see this with like some models where they just repurpose existing org structure and call it a chapter by preserving same roles, same reporting structures, everything that you used to see in the vertical structure now is present in the horizontal structure. So that's not a community. A great community, a good community is when people actually come for functional learning. Then if so, this red variable is going to have a positive effect on this variable. So this is going to lead to this. The great media, the great dimension where people can learn is within a community. So a strong Agile community, a strong Scrum Master community is a good habit, is a great habitat for a Scrum Master role to flourish and advance. I also put this arrow here with a C. C stands for constraint, or you can put a minus sometimes if you want. I've seen a Scrum Master community being a natural organizational antidote. Antidote means it's something that protects you from, right? From creating these towers. So yeah, the knee-jerk reaction, the quick fix will be, hey, let's create a tower. Let's take existing center of excellence or PMO structure and call it an Agile PMO now. God knows, very little needs to be done for that. Well, if you have a strong community, then you will kind of counterbalance this badness. So this is not a good thing. This is a great thing. So this great thing may support this great thing, and this will, lead. I consider obviously less adoption. I'm biased here, maybe. So, okay. So and I have another positive feedback loop here. So, and of course, this is a very simple and very call it subjective way to see this system, because you may say, well, Gene, we're missing one or maybe a few variables here, and this is how they will impact the system. And of course, this is not the goal of this diagram, and the goal of modeling the system is to have a conversation. Once you have a conversation, once you understand the system and you know how to interfere with the system and twist it and tweak it, then this may even become a throwaway. You don't no longer need this piece of paper. The biggest goal I mean, I would say not the biggest. One of the biggest advantages of this model is that you identify points of entry in the system where you can come into the system and with a minor tweak, with a minor adjustment, cause an amplifying effect on the rest of the system. Hopefully a good one. Or maybe identify a bad one and steer away from it, right? It's think of it as like a hydraulics, right? System hydraulics. You just, push a little bit on your steering wheel and your Mack truck changes direction. If you take out hydraulics, it's going to take a few strong men to do it. Let me pause. I have another interesting diagram to show, and kind of think of it this way. We can expand this ecosystem as big and make it as big as a football field, right? Or 10 football fields. And by doing so, we can expose more and more of system dynamics that are sometimes not obvious to a naked eye if we look superficially, right? Some people don't like seeing it. Maybe they don't like exposing it. But people that I've met, majority of them actually love it because once you see the system, you know how to deal with it, right? So, questions, folks, before I have another one. Any? This, since there are no questions, it means it's either amazingly simple and obvious, or hopefully there's an aha moment. I don't know.
I'm just absorbing, so no
Okay.
questions yet.
Yeah, sorry. So let me, so after this one is going to be a final pause. So let me give you another flavor of system modeling. And since, I think there was mentioning of scaling and frameworks. And by the way, I'm not a fan of scaling. I'm a fan of descaling because oftentimes scaling leads to something that's not so great. Let me actually share some of the, I'm a cartoonist. I don't get paid for it, but there was one cartoon that I recently created, and it's kind of talks about what I have at heart lately. It's about descaling, right? These three words have been brutally abused over years. So I'm a personal believer that we've heard plenty about scaling. So in order to scale goodness, we need to remove waste and debris, organizational waste and debris, and that's descaling. So if anything, I'm a descaler, not a scaler. But nevertheless, let me give you a bit of an insight here. So where would it start here, right? So this is the system that talks about frameworks. Let me start. So let me take this one. I'm gonna actually color code it for you in black color. So this is the apex for us, right? Likelihood that a company will consider adoption of a new framework. Okay, so I'm trying to expose some of the dynamics that lie underneath. What actually leads to a decision-making process? What makes a company decide we're going to be installing or using this framework versus that framework? Okay, well, let's try to explore. First, the degree to which a framework challenges existing org structure. It's a strong variable that is going to impact the decision. I put it a thick arrow, which means it's very strong, and I put a minus sign, it's negative. Because if your framework or ways of working that are being proposed challenging existing organizational structure and control and power, and oftentimes we see this frozen middle as really not as much of a powerful structure, but preventive structure, then of course the likelihood of adopting this kind of framework would be lower. So this is going to lower this, lower the possibility of a framework being considered. I promised you to, oh, by the way, so the plus means amplification of effect, minus means reduction of effect, error just a relationship, and this yellow stick is just a system variable, okay? So as these are Lorman's laws of organizational behavior, and probably some of you might have seen them. Number 1 and 2 kind of speak for themselves. So organizations are implicitly optimized to avoid changing the status quo to first and middle level manager. And corollary to number 1, any attempt to change the initiative will be reduced to rendering and overloading the terms. So this has a positive, so this amplifies this negative relationships, this negative relationship. I'm going to pause for a second, let you absorb it. This is going to slow down this, and this is going to amplify the effect, the negative effect of it, okay? Because in fact, these folks represent the existing org structure. And if it's bloated, if it's heavy, if it's excessive, then of course it's going to be a roadblock. So strength of resistance by existing framework, assuming that there's already in place, something is in place, and you've tried, your organization tried with one, attempted with one, and it didn't work, and they may be thinking maybe we should do something else. Now here comes another, so this is going to prevent, of course, naturally, no one wants to give up the seat. There's another variable here, sunk cost, and sunk cost means you lost the money, the ship has sailed. And the sunk cost can come in the form of budgets or reputation or status quo by some people that have introduced it in the first place. So the status quo, I'm sorry, this sunk cost is going to have a positive, it's going to amplify this negative effect. It's like -5 times 100, right? So you have a negative number, you multiply it, and it becomes even more negative number. Okay. Let me approach it from the other angle. Likelihood that frameworks will be recommended by large consultancies. And as we know, I'm sure we've been around the block, we've seen this aplenty. A company typically has on their preferred vendor list at least a few large consultancies. And large consultancies tend to align with certain frameworks for personal strategic needs, which we can actually digress and discuss it as well. But let's just assume that they are influential. So if an XYZ consultancy comes in to an ABC company, whatever recommendation they give, it is highly likely that this other company, the client company, will fall for. Now, strategic, so this is a positive effect, right? Likelihood that a company will consider adoption of a new framework. We're not saying which framework, we're not saying whether it's a good one or a bad one, or truly agile or anti-agile. We're not discussing this at all at the moment. We're just saying, hypothetically, arbitrarily speaking. Now, strategic alignment between a framework and agile tools has impact there. In fact, we have, there was tons of references in this. If a framework has a portfolio manager and a tool has a portfolio manager, guess what? It's a happy marriage, right? Now, the impact it's going to make on a company, that's a big question mark. We don't know whether it's a positive thing or a negative thing. But this is going to amplify this because when you have partnership, of course, one amplifies the other one. I'm using another variable here, is number of people with a framework badge. Badge means a certification, right? Well, of course, the more people you have, the more vibe, the more talk, the more, the more influence. The degree of effort required to obtain framework credential is going to have an opposite, a negative effect in this, because the more difficult it gets, the fewer people have it. Would you not agree? If you have a certification stamping company out there that's just stamp certifications, you almost get one with birth. You get a birth certificate, you get a certification, framework certification. Of course, there's going to be more people in abundance in the system. So that's a negative effect to this. This is a positive effect to this. Percentage of market saturation by framework is going to have a positive effect in the number of people. So market saturation means how much of this framework flows around in the industry, right? A few dynamics here. First, marketing, sales efforts, and promotion of a framework by a company that originates it, of course, it's a huge positive effect, right? The more marketing and sales you put, obviously, the more people know. That's just the nature of our business. Number of framework resellers and wholesalers is going to have an opposite. It's going to amplify this positive effect. Here's another dynamic here. Number of and availability of and affordability of framework training is going to have an opposite effect. Is going to have a positive effect on this as well. Number of qualified and accredited trainers available to teach a given framework is going to have an opposite effect on this. So you can always crunch numbers. Well, how many trainers do you have to deliver XYZ training and deliver this knowledge? If a gazillion, then of course it's going to be a gazillion, into the power of a gazillion. If just a few, then it's going to be less of. I think we're talking about this too. Now, let me explore one more dynamic here. The number of published adoption cases and authentic adoption stories and books and experiments that have been documented over years, maybe more than a decade. And there are some frameworks that have authentic trail record of this that goes back more than a decade, 13, 14 years, right? With multiple books written before it has become commercialized. It will have a positive effect on this relationship. History and duration and body of knowledge collected within a framework. Now, is this a framework, a reaction to the market demand? Well, there is a need for scaling. Let's come up with a framework. Or is it something that has been organically created and nurtured over years and have become what it is today? So I honestly don't know. I put a question mark there because, for example, let's say there was an XYZ framework that has a very, very long track record, books written, documented cases, many case studies, many experiments documented, like 600 plus experiments. However, market penetration and saturation is still very low. So that becomes the question, how much of an impact does this variable have on the system? And obviously downstream impact on the selection process. So here's an example of how you can model it, right? So you can introduce additional variables. And of course, this is just a small piece. Think of it as not even a galaxy, not even a solar system. It's like a solar system in a galaxy, right? Your ecosystem is a galaxy. So you just built a solar system around, a few planets of our solar system, but there's so much more. And systemic impact of some of these could be much, much further out, and vice versa. So I'm going to pause for sure, and I would like this to turn into a conversation.
Oof, a conversation appears.
Yeah, let's have a conversation, Ryan. Let's have a dialogue. Maybe you want to model something, I'll do it for you.
So I've got a quick question.
Yep.
For a little context, before I became a software developer, I was a research chemist for a while. So I've got that scientific kind of thinking, right? So as you're building these causal diagrams, how much of this is just kind of a thought experiment that, oh, it's obvious that this affects this in this way? And how much of it do you need to actually run experiments?
It's a good question.
I see your question marks, right? And those are obviously, hey, we need to test that. We need some evidence. How much is actual experimentation and how much is just kind of based off of, this seems right?
Well, so I think, well, first of all, this is all, I think I mentioned this, right? None of this is the only and the only best way to do it. This is none of this prescriptive. I'm with you. I'm a huge lover of experiments and and tests. Now, sometimes sometimes things are more obvious, like you identify a variable, and this is not a good thing to have in a system. And you identify some of the relationships that are downstream that are kind of obvious to you. I mean, we can argue whether or not internal competition is a good thing. Some people say, well, it's natural selection. You need to have people compete with one another because they're both grow. But if you put them on Scrum, a team together, and instead of sharing and carrying and teaching each other, they're going to be doing this. This is my code base. This is yours. Don't look at me. Of course, that's not a good thing. Some of these discoveries may require, like iterations, right? So like you said, you call it an experiment, and I agree with it. Sometimes you do not know how to answer this question. You just don't know the relationship. So maybe you go off and maybe you experiment something with a team for a sprint or two, and then you have this discovery and come back and say, okay, we have discovered. Now this is our internalized knowledge. And this is, by the way, this is very conditional, very situational. What may work for XYZ company one way may work differently for another company. Like individual performance appraisals and perks and bonuses that I mentioned. For investment banking, it's a huge thing. For a smaller product company or for like a, for software development company, maybe not. Maybe on average, salaries are much higher and people do not get incentivized subjectively based on individual performance. So that really depends. But to your point, Nate, some of this may not be as obvious, and you need to just to slow down and maybe experiment with it. In fact, so I'm going to kind of walk out on a limb and say this, since you asked about experiments, right? So, and I didn't want this to become a framework specific conversation. However, I kind of mentioned, so I might as well. So there is multiple books have been written in large scale Scrum, which is a descaling framework and just became commercialized in 2015, but has books written since 2008. There are 600 plus experiments documented. So some rules, some guides. This is just one-liners, but every number here is a page in the book. So much of it has been experimented, and it took, people, weeks, months, and years to experiment, and that's why they all written in try and avoid form. Try something, avoid something. Under these conditions, you want to try it. Under those conditions, you want to avoid it. So a lot of it is inspection, adaptation, and experimentation fits right in there. So these.
Yeah, thank you for that reference. That's really helpful.
Yeah, I'm happy to. In fact, I will. It's already. I'll upload it on the page that I'll be sharing, but just for the sake of it, let me.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I can imagine a conversation, with some of my colleagues where, for example, if the variable was, the amount of, upfront planning, and then the what we're looking for is, project success, drawing that arrow, like I would put a minus, they would put a plus, right? So that's where we really need to have those conversations and have some actual data to see what's really happening there.
Yep, I totally agree. And in fact, again, well, we say this a lot in when we teach less. We want people to own their own decisions as opposed to renting from us. So it's owning versus renting. So the power of these diagrams, or the power of this method, way of discovering, is that once you discover something, you kind of internalize it, you own it, and it's kind of, you can't unsee it, right? So it's like, why am I seeing this? It was nice, and I did not see it. Now it's bugging me. So, and we want it, right? So, and sometimes it becomes frustrating.
Well, and I can imagine, you mentioned the power of these being the conversation that you have. And so I think, that situation I mentioned where I say it's a minus and you say it's a plus, that forces that conversation. So
Exactly.
I can see the value of this either way, right? Like even with those where we're just not sure, that might make it even more valuable.
Yep. In fact, if we see differently, and we belong to the same system, the same company, the same team, it could mean something. It could mean that we, obviously seeing things differently, and that becomes now a sticky point. Why are we seeing things different? Like if we work for different companies, it could be at least explainable. But if we work for the same system, for the same organization, that's a question. Maybe because there's some variables in the system that are missing, that are impacting those relationships, and we need to discover those. You see those and I don't. And if I did, maybe I would change my, plus to minus, or, direct to the opposite, direct to opposite.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you for asking the question, Nate. Anyone else, folks? I'm happy to maybe want to, test it out, or maybe I'll share another. So there are tons of these, right? So if you really want to read while you're thinking about questions, right, you can also read about system thinking. So system modeling, system thinking. You can read a very nice write-up. If you go to on the principles of this mighty site, I'm sorry, not lean thinking is very good too. System thinking, I'm going to ping you to the channel. It kind of talks you through, this is what we typically do in class. That's what would not just in class, right? If you're in organizational settings with a client, the best way to discover the system would be in front of the wall on a whiteboard where you can engage multiple people. Of course, in this day and age, it's a little problematic, right? So we can do it on a mirror board or mural board, whatever board you use or whatever facility you have available. Yep. Anyone else with a question or a remark or anything that may provoke us? Here's another one. Going once, twice. Everyone is familiar with the term local optimization? Or maybe it requires 30-second explaining what it is. Okay. Global optimization. When you were optimizing for better outcomes of the entire system globally. Local optimization is when we optimized very locally. For example, I'm a single function analyst or a single specialty worker, and I will be locally optimized just for my specific role. Like I'm a BA and I'm an Agile BA, and I write Agile stories, and I write, quite a few of them, and I've built a backlog, a few hundred items in there that will probably take, 2 years to reshuffle. Well, I was very local optimized. I did the best I could. I wrote a lot. I did a lot of analysis, but who knows what's going to happen in 2 years? Who knows what's going to happen in 3 months? My contract may end, and there will be no one to interpret these stories, and developers are on a completely different route, and the product owner probably cares about something else. Local optimization 101. So here's an example of local optimization. When we introduce this system optimizing goal, and sometimes we hear it in town hall coming from a senior manager, we need to ensure that developers are working efficiently. Of course, we need to. They need to be working efficiently, but the message itself, what does it bring with it? This may lead to this variable appearing in the system, expecting work from people based on what they do best. Of course, if I'm expected to be efficient, I'm not going to do anything else but what I'm good at. If you hire me as a back-end Java developer or an Oracle database person, I'll do my thing. I'll along the lines of my skill set. Likelihood of me relying only on my primary skill set and domain knowledge is going to be very high. So Gene is a back-end person, or Gene is a UI UX designer, so he's going to design GUI, 5 years ahead. Now, if this is true, then likelihood of me willing to learn new skills in domain is going to be lower. That's why it says the opposite here. Seems like a minus, right? Why would I? First of all, I'm not being incentivized for it. I'm expected to do a lot and efficiently, so let me do the best I can. So a more systemic problem that it brings is what? A likelihood that people rely only on their primary skill set leads to having multiple single skill set centric and component centric private backlogs. Gene is going to have his, Jennifer is going to have hers, Nate is going to have, he's going to get his. Jason is a product owner. He comes in and says, hey guys, how can I prioritize this backlog against that one, So you end up with 3 backlogs of single specialty work. And of course, from a standpoint of from a customer perspective, that's a nonsense. That's how you lose a good product owner, because they are just frustrated. They cannot prioritize one product backlog against the other. So, but it's going to lead to it. It's not a good thing to have in a system. It's going to have an opposite effect on the ability of a product owner to prioritize a backlog. In fact, those three are not product backlogs. Those like technical backlogs or single function specialty backlogs or private individual backlogs that kind of, it's easy for me to visualize my work, sure. But what good does it do for my product owner if my work is just a component, a small piece of a feature? Now, this thing by itself is great because if a product owner can prioritize a backlog, and obviously it comes from a customer's perspective, then with delay, it's going to have a dramatic positive effect on the likelihood of making real customers happy and having system global optimization, right? This way, if I develop this diagram, it may look like this. Promotion of individual performance, not team performance. Gene, you were brought in as a UI, UX designer. We're going to review you. We're going to assess you based on your primary skill set, what you were brought in for. And of course, the shinier you are, the better you are. The more we're going to like you. So your performance is super critical here. So as I'm focused on my personal individual performance, of course, it's going to be at the expense of something, right? It's like physics, in the system. Energy does not come out of nowhere. It does not disappear into nothing. It's an ecosystem. So I will be sucking onto something, and this something is team performance. Because if everyone worries only about their individual performance, most likely they will be very, very centric on their ways of working, and sharing and caring and learning and cross-pollination with knowledge would be much lower. So of course, it's an opposite effect. Trust, respect, support, healthy organizational culture. It's going to, and of course, this is probably, I don't think it's an aha moment for anyone, because this is, we refer to this as a huge gap between science and business, right? I mean, there's a plenty of writing in that. Those things probably best to be abolished or minimized and changed systemically. So another example of a system dynamic, another example of a system model, and we use system thinking, of course, to model it. Pausing again, see if there are any questions.
So there's a question in the chat from Kathy. Static versus dynamic complexity. When making a CLD, could you touch on that a bit?
Sure. So assuming that the system is complex, right? If it was a snapshot in time and place, frozen, like we froze, and we looked at the whole canvas, the picture, it's a pretty complex thing, but it's static. It's hard-coded. But since this isn't the case and time goes on and things are moving, then we expect a high degree of dynamicity. It's not, for the lack of a better word. It's highly dynamic. Things are happening. These variables interact with one another constantly. So relationships are not linear, they're superlinear sometimes. Impact is not linear, it's superlinear. So with these diagrams, we can go only as far as we can. Like we can, we can probably get closer to seeing the system, but in order for us to actually see dynamically what happens in the system over time, we may have an infinite number of these diagrams, like almost one against another. And that would be more, that would give us a better understanding what's going to happen over time. Because there could be another variable that gets introduced into the system 5 seconds after we had a conversation, and it's going to impact the system, right? So when we're frozen in time, that's one thing. But when we're constantly changing, then it's almost unpredictable, right? So we can.
It makes me think about that Cynefin framework with the different axes around complexity, complicated, chaotic, and
Yeah,
what's the other one?
I'm not that familiar with it, but I think it makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Nate knows what I'm talking about.
Organizations are very complex systems, and during runtime, things change, may change unpredictably. So this is probably as good as us understanding the system at the given point in time. Hypothetically speaking, if we knew what may happen in 3 weeks, perhaps we could maybe add another variable, like maybe color code it and say, well, in 3 weeks, when this variable comes in and starts impacting the system, what's going to happen then? But it's going to be just a hypo. So,
Just curious if anyone in the group tonight has ever used something like this. I think earlier, I forget who it was. It was it Kevin who talked? Someone was talking about a main part of their job is kind of uncovering, you know, inefficiencies and trying to kind of work through some of that. And I don't know if this is a tool that anyone's used, or this, I don't know if you call it a tool, Jean, or
I call it a coaching tool. I call it, it's not an electronic tool. I mean, although I'm using the electronic board, but it's not a, you know, what we call, we oftentimes hear, you know, a tool means, you know, it's not like a, I'm trying to stay very agnostic of terms and names, but it is a tool to me because I use it to expose system dynamics. So it's a coaching tool.
but it's a collaborative endeavor, right?
Exactly, it's a collaborative endeavor. It's a way to expose system dynamics, to engage people into having a conversation. As a matter of fact, before I forget, I pinged the book by Peter Senge, The Fifth Discipline. If you guys like beer and want to read about system modeling, system thinking, this is the great book. So it has nothing to do with agility or Scrum or, you know, large scale Scrum. It has just helps you understand, like in the beer industry, between manufacturing to wholesaling to retail selling, system dynamics. So it's a good way to, you know, to spend your night. It's good to drink. It's good to drink beer and read about it. Yeah. Well, what else? What else can I share with you, or any questions on anything?
I have a question.
Please, Jason.
Thanks. I guess my organization's had this, like, it depends on the person. So a person thinks that there's an initiative that this type of thinking and conversation would help. But then it inevitably comes down to those quick fix kind of perspectives of decision making, like should we move forward with something or not? And this type of thinking, I guess, falls flat in my organization just because there's no end number and it's so abstract. So there's no concrete in way to give it more value to the, you know, like a bean counter, somebody that's trying to figure out some kind of formulaic, you know, approach to how do we do that? You know, it's so abstract. It just falls flat sometimes. Is there a way to use this to speak to C-level people, to not just look at it one-dimensionally?
So yeah, so I think I mentioned. So I find this approach, this tool. Let me call it what it is. It's a coaching tool. I find this tool very useful on a few occasions. To discuss things with my colleagues, you know, other coaches and Scrum Masters, whoever is engaged in the same effort as me. Also find it very useful sometimes on my own. I mean, quite frankly, a lot of it I've put together on my own with my own hand. However, it's based on some prior conversation, so could be somewhat biased, of course. So, but to answer your question directly, I've seen this. I've tried this quite often with senior echelon, but you could do twofold. And let's face it, some of these guys they play very busy, right? They want to be very busy, and they sometimes feel it's beneath them. So you also be, I mean, I have to be careful who I'm dealing with. If he or she isn't a buyer of discussion, of having a discussion, then why waste my time or hers? So two ways I would typically do it. First of all, with someone like a senior person, maybe I wouldn't make it as complex. Sometimes I would just work backwards, depending how much time you have with them. Maybe you need to do a bit of prep work, model the system, present it to her, and say, what do you think? Do you agree or disagree? How would you change it? What would you introduce to change the impact? Depending how, how available, how flexible he or she is, maybe they'll give you more time. Maybe you can actually develop it on the fly together, real time. But the short answer is, those senior managers, they're just as much of humans as we are. So I'm also going to walk out on them and say this. I like John Cotter's perspective on this. In order for someone to really listen to you, you need to create a state of urgency. If they don't have it yet, create one. So make them feel they listen to you or else. So they're all humans. They got a paycheck to earn, and they got a family to support, and they have an organization to run. Show them somehow that, they have to pay attention to this and engage. And maybe this is a tricky way to get them in, like a way to trick them into a conversation. So it's also, and you want to be safe, right? You want to always remain safe and not get yourself into harm's way. So, but the short answer is yes. I think it's a very powerful way to get them engaged. It's much better than writing a novel, like sending an email, Mr. Jones, these are the problems I have seen, and you give them a bunch of nasty bullets, right? If anything, just create a simple diagram and send across. And look, this is the system I'm observing. You want to talk about it? What do you want?
Thank you.
I mean, that's just my approach, right?
Yeah.
When we teach large-scale Scrum in good old days, and even today, some trainers teach it in person. Imagine the room, this huge room, like all walls are free of paintings, just white canvas. And we oftentimes have senior managers come into the training, and they actually model the system. They're part of the class. They have to model. They have to see. Once they see it, it's hard for them. So now they own it. So what they do with this information is a different story. There's no guarantee that someone who learns something will put their knowledge to use in a good way. Maybe they are looking for a way to create an antidote against goodness, which is badness. Yeah. But certainly it's a good tool. Well, anyone else perhaps? We have 5 minutes remaining. About the references, before I forget, I think I pinged you. I'll do it again. I'm gonna load up some of the, I'm gonna put up the video here, and I'm going to, let me copy these links again. And I'm going to create JPEGs of these diagrams, at least whatever we have covered. And I'm gonna upload them there as well, in case if you want to come back to them. And maybe you want to rerun it locally, like rerun it within your respective organizations. Just like Nate said, validate whether this still holds to be true in your space, and undo them. Come up with a different solution if there is one exists. Well, Liz, Jan. What do you think?
Sorry.
Shall we give people
Yeah.
back the 4 minutes, or maybe they want to have some, maybe you want to have to make, do you want to make another announcement maybe or something?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you, Jean. Thank you. This was very enlightening tonight. And thank you for sharing this. Thank you to everyone who joined. I was trying to look back through. I thought there was a question in here that I wanted to touch base on, but I'm not sure. I think I've lost sight of it. Oh, here we go. There was a question in here regarding getting a recording of this session, and you may have answered that in the dialogue after that question was answered. Did you do that?
Oh, I'm sorry. The question was about the recording.
Yep.
Yeah, it will be recorded as we speak. So once we finish, it's gonna zap, and I'm gonna put it to YouTube in the cloud, and I'll put it up on that page so people
On that
can-
page. Okay.
So I usually do this within an hour.
Awesome. Okay. Yep. I did catch that now that you've repeated it. Thank you so much
Yeah, no
for
worries.
repeating it.
Yeah, and I encourage anyone. I mean, like I mentioned, some of the resources that you can read, you can explore on your own. If you have any
Yeah.
questions, just shoot me a note, email. I put my Slack channel as well. I have my own workspace free. Just ping me if you want, or email me. You know, whatever comes to mind. I have a few models around the different organizational like Scrum Master role, command and control behaviors, things that could potentially generate some ideas, and you can just leverage them.
Yeah, I really appreciate all of the references that you gave.
Yeah, there's tons of more. I mean, if you want to just look at my site there, there's plenty. I need to find where they are. It's just somewhere. There's specific links to specific PDFs.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. I'll need to.
Yeah.
I was looking at it some prior to since we reached out to you to speak this month, so it's on my list to go back to and look at.
Oh, it was